You are listening to Catholic Family Podcast.
Greetings, fellow travelers through the liturgical year. This is Lisa Davis with another Feast Day Quick Take on the feast of one of my patron saints, Saint Elizabeth of Hungary. Just so you know, because we figure there's no such thing as too many heavenly helpers, our family has always claimed as our own every patron of every derivative of our names. So my name being a diminutive of Elizabeth, I get to claim the mother of St. John the Baptist, who is the patroness of pregnant women, especially those who bear children late in life. As you might guess, she was a helpful ally. St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, the patroness of Catholic teachers, who was another great friend. And today's saint, the patroness of sanctity within a happy marriage. And what married person doesn't need help there? St. Elizabeth's example and help, I think, is especially valuable to women in our day who struggle to find their role in marriage in a world that has turned the institution on its head. Now, unless you're tempted to think that St. Elizabeth, a coddled princess married to a powerful prince, had fewer obstacles to overcome than we do, let me explain about her life. First of all, arranged marriages were the norm in early 13th century Hungary amongst the royalty. With no say in the matter, St. Elizabeth was betrothed to Ludwig of Thuringia when she was only 4 years old and married at the tender age of 14. She had been required to leave her home and family to live in the castle of Ludwig's people from early childhood. By the grace of God, however, Ludwig was a good man, and they determined together to have a holy and happy marriage. In due course, they learned to love one another deeply. They had 3 children and were the model of wedded bliss and harmony, while always being true children of the Church, particular patrons of the poor, and examples of piety to all. It sounds like a happily ever after story, but Elizabeth had some very rough going before she achieved her final happiness. A tragedy of crosses interrupted her happily ever after story at a heart-achingly early chapter. When Elizabeth and Ludwig's youngest child was still an infant, Ludwig was killed while fighting in the Crusades, leaving Elizabeth to cruel treatment by the royal court. Angry at her donation of her dowry to a Franciscan hospital, and because she refused to be remarried into their court, her in-laws became her worst enemies. She was dispossessed of everything she owned, kicked out of the royal apartments, and forced to beg for herself and her children for survival. At one point, she was resigned to shelter in an abandoned pigsty, literally shunned by everyone. But Elizabeth suffered all these crosses with perfect patience. She came to support herself and her children by hiring out her skill in spinning, and already a third-order Franciscan, she devoted as much time as possible to helping nurse the sick in the hospital that she had endowed. Throughout all of her troubles and exile, she counted heaven as her true home, looking forward only to the promise of eventually resting in Christ, once again reunited with her beloved husband in heaven. Worn out by sorrow and hardship, she died in the year 1231 at the age of only 24, and became a symbol of Christian charity to those who, to their latent sorrow, had cast her out, and then to the edification and example of the whole world, when she was canonized only 4 years later in 1235. She is one of the patronesses of Franciscan tertiaries and the Sisters of Mercy, as well as the patron saint of beggars, of brides, of widows, and of lace makers, textile workers, people in exile, and, as we said, holy marriages. But the lasting impression of St. Elizabeth of Hungary that most of us carry in our hearts, the image that captures the imagination of little girls the trad world over every All Saints' Day, is the incident of the miraculous roses. Most of us are familiar with this image in St. Elizabeth's iconography. The story goes that early in her marriage, before Ludwig had completely adopted the faith in a spirit of genuine piety, the young prince, no doubt fearing for her safety, forbade his wife to have personal dealings with the poor. This provision became a caveat to Elizabeth's charity that she resolved to work around, in full respect of her lord's wishes, while still making it her business to daily feed the poor from the ample provisions of the palace kitchens. A feat she managed quite well, until one day, feeling the cause of the poor the greater responsibility, she felt compelled to disobey her husband. Now, there's no telling how the situation came about. The details are lost to history. But for some reason, the poor were going to go hungry if Elizabeth didn't take matters into her own hands on this particular day. Perhaps God knew the young prince needed proof of his benediction on his holy wife and her work for the poor. Whatever the circumstances leading up to it, though, we find slender young Elizabeth, a big basket of bread hooked over one arm, her train looped over the other arm, picking her way across the cobblestones toward an alleyway on the square where the poor knew to congregate to receive sustenance from the royal household. And who should surprise her in such an unlikely place? Ludwig, of course, who knew exactly what she was up to. Had it been a little bird, perhaps the Holy Ghost, whispering in his ear that she would be at this place at this time? We'll never know. No doubt, though, he'd had to suppress a smile when she hid her expression of surprise with a curtsy in greeting. "And where goest thou, dear wife?" he may have asked. "Oh, only to visit my friends," she answered, which was true enough. "Oh ho, is that so?" He narrowed his eyes at his little Elizabeth and her large burden, perfectly aware of what she hid. "And what hast thou in so big a basket that thou bringest your friends, dear wife?" And she was caught. She bit her lip, praying she'd be forgiven for disobeying and allowed to continue on with her task, perhaps with her husband as an escort. Elizabeth smiled up at Ludwig and, pulling away the linen covering the bread, well, you know the rest of the story. By the will of God, the bread Elizabeth had been carrying was miraculously transformed to beautiful roses. No doubt Elizabeth was as startled as Ludwig, but she'd have understood God's hand at work. In transforming the bread to roses, he transformed the heart of her lukewarm husband, as only he could do. Afterward, and until the end of his short life, Ludwig was known to have been a pious Catholic, equal to his wife in his contributions to the poor. Though he's never been canonized, in his own country, Ludwig is also regarded as a saint. So now I have to tell you that as a wife of some 35 years, I have some thoughts about this. I don't know about you, but on my first pass at seriously contemplating the story, once I got beyond the beautiful iconography and the sorrow of Elizabeth's difficult widowhood, I did a little double take on St. Elizabeth's receiving a reward for disobeying her husband. I mean, didn't she have a scolding coming to her? Was it not well within Ludwig's rights to be put out that she disobeyed him? I think it was within his rights. At least I understand his concern for his wife. But was it not more within God's rights to encourage the higher virtue of charity in Elizabeth in such a way that it also taught Ludwig an important lesson? The point here was to encourage charity, not disobedience, and we see that Ludwig understood God's point and mended his ways. He and St. Elizabeth had a loving marriage that only grew in happiness and unity when they were both equally committed to it as a sacrament, having finally landed on the same page, faith-wise. How often do we find this in marriages today? It's certainly something to pray about, for ourselves and for the world in general. St. Angela de Merici put into words what I think we all know instinctively. Disorder in society is the result of disorder in the family. And are we ever seeing this played out? It's a sign of our upside-down times that the very foundation of marriage between a man and a woman is debated. Ludwig and Elizabeth would have been horrified if they could have seen into the future. But the church, the true church, has never been vague in its definition of the sacrament of matrimony. Neither the fact of its immutability nor the importance of its preservation as the key building block of society. In his encyclical Rerum Novarum, Pope Leo XIII stated, quote, "No human law can abolish the natural and original right of marriage, nor in any way limit the chief and principal purpose of marriage ordained by God's authority from the beginning: increase and multiply. Hence we have the family, the society of a man's house, a society very small, one must admit, but nonetheless a true society, and one older than any state. Consequently, it has rights and duties peculiar to itself, which are quite independent of the state." End quote. In his encyclical on Christian marriage, Du Multa, he states further, "The man is the ruler of the family and the head of the woman, but because she is flesh of his flesh and bone of his bone, let her be subject and obedient to the man, not as a servant, but as a companion, so that nothing be lacking of honor or of dignity in the obedience which she pays. Let divine charity be the constant guide of their mutual relations, both in him who rules and in her who obeys, since each bears the image, the one of Christ, the other of the Church." End quote. It was St. Elizabeth's duty, as it is every wife's, to submit to her husband's authority. Preceding any encyclicals, it's a biblical principle. In St. Paul's letter to the Ephesians, chapter 5, the epistle which is read at nuptial masses, he tells us, quote, "Let the women be subject to their husbands as to the Lord, because the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church. He is the Savior of his body. Therefore, as the church is subject to Christ, so also let the wives be to their husbands in all things." End quote. So yes, ladies, it's a fact. Our husbands have final say. Some women who have been unwittingly indoctrinated by feminist propaganda this last century or so might take umbrage with this. But you know what? I think we women have the easier directive. All we are instructed to do is obey, or not, and we answer for that. But our husbands hold a grave responsibility to God for what we do under their authority. They are graded on their leadership of the family. Mind you, that doesn't mean we wives shouldn't do everything in our power to influence our husbands to holiness, and vice versa. But men have the greater responsibility to God for the family. The buck stops with them. This basic understanding of the structure of the family has been so corrupted in our day that the most completely immersed trads amongst us can find traces of the infection in our own mindsets. Whether we realize it or not, we've been trained to resent our roles. Pope Pius XI, in his encyclical Casti Connubii, takes the understanding of that sticky word subjection a step further, fully explaining that, quote, "This subjection does not deny or take away the liberty which fully belongs to the woman, both in view of her dignity as a human person and in view of her most noble office as wife and mother and companion. Nor does it bid her obey her husband's every request, if not in harmony with right reason or with the dignity due to the wife. Nor, in fine, does it imply that the wife should be put on a level with those persons who in law are called minors, to whom it is not customary to allow free exercise of their rights on account of their lack of mature judgment or of their ignorance of human affairs. But it forbids that exaggerated liberty, which cares not for the good of the family. It forbids that in this body which is the family, the heart be separated from the head to the great detriment of the whole body and the proximate danger of ruin. For if the man is the head, the woman is the heart. And as he occupies the chief place in ruling, so she may and ought to claim for herself the chief place in love. Again, this subjection of wife to husband in its degree and manner may vary according to the different conditions of persons, place, and time. In fact, if the husband neglects his duty, it falls to the wife to take his place in directing the family. But the structure of the family and its fundamental law, established and confirmed by God, must always and everywhere be maintained intact. He continues, The same false teachers who try to dim the luster of conjugal faith and purity do not scruple to do away with the honorable and trusting obedience which the woman owes to the man. Many of them even go further and assert that such a subjection of one party to the other is unworthy of human dignity, that the rights of husband and wife are equal, wherefore they boldly proclaim the emancipation of women has been or ought to be effected. This, however, is not the true emancipation of women, nor that rational and exalted liberty which belongs to the noble office of a Christian woman and wife. It is rather the debasing of the womanly character and the dignity of motherhood, and indeed of the whole family, as a result of which the husband suffers the loss of his wife, the children of their mother, and the home and the whole family of an ever watchful guardian. More than this false liberty and unnatural equality with a husband is to the detriment of the woman herself. For if the woman descends from her truly regal throne, to which she has been raised within the walls of the home by means of the gospel, she will soon be reduced to the old state of slavery, if not in appearance, certainly in reality, and become, as amongst the pagans, the mere instrument of man." End quote. Of note, especially today in America, is the endeavor to not only legally encode the sin and scourge of unnatural marriages, but to give them laud and honor, when it is primary to all understanding that the chief purpose and blessing of matrimony is the begetting of children. Throughout Catholic history, as reasoned by the great doctors of the Church, such as St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas, and repeated by the popes throughout the centuries, it is the child that holds the first place in the blessings of marriage. Likewise, the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah is uniformly condemned. Yet is this affront to the true sacrament normalized at every turn. In Casti Connubii, Pope Pius XI listed and refuted the degradations of the institution of marriage, from feminism to contraception, to abortion, to eugenics, in 1930, when it would seem these evils would have been barely hatching in Satan's diabolical incubator. Pope Pius XI almost prophetically lamented in chapter 44 of his encyclical, quote, "When we consider the great excellence of chaste wedlock, it appears all the more regrettable that particularly in our day we should witness this divine institution often scorned and on every side degraded. For now, alas, not secretly nor under cover, but openly, with all sense of shame put aside, now by word, again by writings, by theatrical productions of every kind, by romantic fiction, by amorous and frivolous novels, by cinematography portraying in vivid scene, in addresses broadcast by radio telephony. In short, by all the inventions of modern science, the sanctity of marriage is trampled upon and derided. Divorce and adultery, all the basest vices, either are extolled or at least depicted in such colors as to appear to be free of all reproach and infamy. Books are not lacking which dare to pronounce themselves as scientific, but which in truth are merely coated with a veneer of science, in order that they may the more easily insinuate their ideas. The doctrines defended in these are offered for sale as the productions of modern genius, of that genius, namely, which, anxious only for truth, is considered to have emancipated itself from all those old-fashioned and immature opinions of the ancients, and to the number of these antiquated opinions they relegate the traditional doctrine of Christian marriage. These thoughts are instilled into men of every class, rich and poor, masters and workers, lettered and unlettered, married and single, the godly and godless, old and young. But for these last, as easiest prey, the worst snares are laid." End quote. And we are seeing almost the entire world caught in these snares. Many, if not most children, have never experienced what a good and holy marriage looks like, and what a normal family should be. So then, what can we do? Pope Pius XI tells us that, quote, "It is necessary, first of all, that men's minds be illuminated with the true doctrine of Christ regarding the sacrament, and secondly, that Christian spouses, the weakness of their wills strengthened by the internal grace of God, shape all their ways of thinking and of acting in conformity with that pure law of Christ, so as to obtain true peace and happiness for themselves and for their families. And Father Lawrence Lovisic, in the Catholic Family Handbook, gives us some excellent guidelines in his 8 Beatitudes for the home. Blessed is the home where the father, mother, and children love God sincerely and keep His commandments faithfully, go to confession regularly, receive Holy Communion frequently, and pray much, for the Lord abides in such a home. Blessed is the home in which Sunday and holy days are properly observed, for the members will one day meet again at the festival of heaven. Blessed is the home that no one leaves to go to sinful amusements, for in it the joy of Christ shall reign. Blessed is the home where unkind speech does not enter, nor cursing, nor bad literature, nor intemperance, for on that home will be heaped the blessings of peace. Blessed is the home where father and mother are conscious of the sacred dignity of bringing children into the world and educating them in the service of God, where they faithfully fulfill the obligations they have toward each other and their children, and detest the sins sometimes committed in the married state, for they will merit the favor and abundant blessings of God. Blessed is the home to which a priest is called to attend the sick, for their illness will have its consolation, and death will be happy. Blessed is the home where Christian doctrine is properly appreciated and learned from the catechism and good books, for in that home the faith will be kept firm and active. Blessed is the home where the parents find their joy in children who are dutiful and obedient, and where the children find in their parents the example of the fear and love of God, for that home will be the abode of just people, the haven of virtues, and the ark of salvation. Where there is faith, there is love. Where there is love, there is peace. Where there is peace, there is God. Where there is God, there is heaven. Saint Elizabeth of Hungary, patron of holy marriages, pray for our world that it will recognize this vital building block and care enough to relay the foundation of our society according to the wisdom of the Church. Blessed be God in His angels and in His saints.